went up in a huge conflagration that destroyed all the buildings between the Gympie Times and the Mining Exchange Hotel. The fire broke out just after midnight. They're all at night, these fires. In an old timber building occupied by the Ipswich Cullinanes factory. Flames leapt up to the skylight of Ferguson Brothers' brand new two-storey brick store, from where sparks fell onto the roof of Woolger's saddlery and house. And there's an old picture of that saddlery and house. On the far side, you can see the Gympie Times, the original printery of the Gympie Times. One of the problems in saving the Ferguson store was that a rumour got about that it contained boxes of dynamite. So volunteers were very reluctant to enter it. William and Thomas Ferguson also lost a number of other buildings they owned in this section. As the fire spread, the Gympie Times building was threatened. But, said the Gympie Times, thanks to the help that many cool heads and willing hands gave, and which we gratefully hasten to acknowledge, the Gympie Times was saved, and the morning paper was published, though rather late, through having to hurriedly remove our type and suspend setting in the composing room until all the risk was over. But they got the paper out. At the top end of Mary Street, the blaze was stopped by a high brick parapet wall at the Mining Exchange Hotel. Although a fire that broke out in a skylight there had to be put out. The buildings opposite were clad in wet blankets and soused with water. None of them caught alight, but afterwards it was noticed that their verandas had been singed in the intense heat. Now, this is a very poor photo. Keith Wazer found this photo and copied it and clarified it for us. If you look carefully, you can see what's going on. This is the brick wall that prevented the Mining Exchange Hotel from burning down. This is all that's left of Ferguson Brothers' beautiful new two-storey brick store. In Upper Mary Street, you know that little bend? You can always pick that little bend, there's a little bend. And that is where the saddlery was. You can see on the edge of the road, that bend was there then, and it's there today. Many of the destroyed buildings contain the offices of solicitors, mining secretaries, share brokers, banks and commission agents, and small businesses such as photographers, hairdressers, tobacconists and watchmakers. Some of these managed to remove the essentials of their work, but Tozer and Conwell solicitors lost their law books, their account books, and many valuable securities. The Gympie Times commented on the stupidity of local residents. In view of the fire of 1881, it might have been imagined that local residents would have had the sense to make some provision against the recurrence of a like calamity. But unfortunately, the lesson, except for a few months when it was fresh in everybody's mind, had no very salutary effect. Consequently, when the fire broke out on Saturday morning, the business and other people here were just as unprepared to cope with it as if nothing of the sort had previously taken place. Within a few years, this side of Mary Street was also rebuilt in non-combustible materials. Woolger's saddlery next to the Gympie Times was replaced by the Royal Bank, later the National Bank. Above that, solid commercial buildings were constructed, occupied at first by Hood the tailor, and Holloway, the ironmonger. They're now occupied, for example, by Amelia's restaurant. By the turn of the 20th century, Gympie civic fathers had learned the lessons preached by the Gympie Times. They planned big improvements, and although the Great Depression of the 1890s slowed progress, in 1900 the Jones Hill pumping station was built and pipes brought Mary River water into the heart of town. At the same time, the fire brigade was established in a 2-storey fire station on Calton Hill. This building was removed to Stewart Terrace, where it is still a block of flats, and it was replaced by the brick fire station that serves the city today. With the fire danger under better control, the 20th century suffered only one fire on the scale of the previous century. This occurred on the night of Saturday, the 11th of May, 1929, when a section of Central Mary Street, from Tobin's Cafe to Memorial Lane, was destroyed. This time, there were water mains to which the fire brigade's hoses could be connected, and by directing water onto the buildings on either side of the fire, the Imperial Hotel on the right and Tobin's Cafe on the left, and onto Wilbraham's, Patrick's and Goodwin's buildings on the opposite side of the street, the firemen were able to save them. Plate glass windows were cracked by the heat, and the fruit in Patrick's windows was burnt black, the tomatoes being literally fried. That's the Gympie Times. Flames from the fire shot 46 metres into the air, and sparks from burning timber started small fires up to half a mile away. But there was no wind, and a heavy dew dampened any serious outbreaks. This fire, which seemed to have been deliberately lit, broke out under the stage of the Tivoli Theatre and consumed the theatre, the State Butcher's shop, 2 stationery shops, a saddlery, a boot shop, and all the outbuildings back to Reef Street. Where possible, volunteers moved stocks and fittings out into the street, but 2 aspects of this event showed that the Gympie community in 1929 was perhaps not as cohesive as the Goldfields community that preceded it. First, some of the shop contents placed in the street were damaged or stolen. And second, while generally the assistance from volunteers was excellent, about a dozen men refused to help the firemen when asked to give a hand with the hoses. Most of the businessmen were insured, but several families who lived above the shops lost all their belongings. One volunteer suffered burns when a beam fell on his arms, but the only deaths were those of Mr. Wilson's poultry and 2 parrots belonging to Mr. Ashton. Most of the other significant 20th century fires consumed only one building. Cullinanes Emporium, located in Central Mary Street since 1868, was burnt down twice. First in 1885, after which it was rebuilt and greatly expanded. And again in the early hours of Saturday, the 6th of November, 1937. While crowds of onlookers watched from Mary, Reef and Young Streets, Fire Chief Smith and 13 men, assisted by 8 policemen, fought the fire. The Gympie Times described the scene, and they described it really well. In the grey light before dawn, the clouds reflected the crimson from the leaping flames, and a column of smoke rose, in the absence of wind, straight then broke and drifted northward across the sky. Meanwhile, the whole of the interior of the building was ablaze, and spectators were awed by what was a memorable spectacle of glamour and destruction. The high brick and concrete walls of the building hemmed in the fire, which leapt above like one mighty red tongue and streamed through the windows. At intervals, the falling of iron from the roof could be heard, and 2 loud reports were followed by a stream of sparks and blazing fragments of timber. Now and then, green and blue flames shot up in the midst of the red and black, giving a touch of eerie beauty to the scene. When the crash of glass and roofing from the Mary Street side was heard, the cry arose that the facade had fallen. But when the smoke cleared a little, the 2 flag masts could still be seen erect. And you can see those 2 flag masts on the facade there. That photo was taken not long before the fire. The crowd at the rear were helplessly fascinated by the bulging of the great walls, which minute by minute were expected to fall outwards. The back wall was the first, in fact, the only one to go. A crack on the top of the wall on the commercial bank side widened more and more, and the apex of the back wall, about 10 metres high, moved out from the perpendicular, tottered a while, then fell. The whole wall seemed to buckle and came down with a deafening crash, carrying an electric light pole almost to the ground and breaking into thousands of fragments. That's a photo from the Gympie Times showing the result. But all you can see, because of course it's still smoky and black, is the facade is there, the side walls are there, and everything in the middle has collapsed. So we're looking at it from the back, from the under street. The surviving facade, built in 1924, was incorporated into a new building and still stands today. Cullinanes' business survived for another 46 years. Now, hotels seem to be particularly combustible. The Alliance, the Australian, the Commercial, the Columbia, the Railway, the list goes on and on. But here are 3 20th century blazers that are within living memory, and I think they might be within the living memory of some of the people here. The Mining Exchange Hotel in Upper Mary Street escaped the 1891 fire, only to be burnt down half a century later. This prestigious, triple-fronted hotel consisted of an old timber structure in the middle, flanked by a 2-storey brick building on its lower side, and the original mining exchange, which then became the stock exchange and then became the part of the hotel, on the top side. So you can see the triple fronts in that picture. The site of this hotel is now occupied by the RSL Club. At least 20 people were asleep in the hotel on the freezingly cold Sunday night of the 2nd of June 1946, when an explosion woke them and the inhabitants of the surrounding hills. Most of the guests, in their night attire, had to jump nearly 4 metres from the upper verandas to the safety of the street. Fire Chief Walters and 24 men with 3 reels and 2 pumps rushed to the scene. The building and its contents were destroyed in about 2 hours, but the firemen fought on until dawn and were commended for confining the damage to just one site. Constable Sidon Spinner and Night Watchman Surtees were praised for ensuring the orderly escape of the hotel's guests. Captain Packer, the Salvation Army officer, helped with the hoses and supplied quantities of hot tea for the workers, while Mrs. Batson arrived bearing hot coffee. Ambulance Superintendent Lou Dean and his bearers assisted Alfred Singleton, who slipped and suffered a sprained ankle, Violet Houghton, who was struck on the shoulder by an escape ladder that fell from the burning building, and the hotel's licensee, Mrs. Denton, who suffered burns and shock and was taken to the hospital. Some of you might know June Ellis.